Good evening, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm so glad that all of you have decided to join us this evening for this event that I am very excited to bring you. If you have not been to one of our events here at the GLBT Historical Society, my name is Lee Pfeffer. I am the manager of museum experience here at the Society, and I thank you all for coming to this program. Before we get started tonight, I want to start by acknowledging that the GLBT Historical Society is based on Ohlone tribal land. I invite any Indigenous folks with us today to make themselves visible in the chat and be recognized as we honor the contemporary and ancestral lives of America's Indigenous peoples. This event is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel and our website. And if you're watching live, we welcome your active participation in the chat, and we encourage you to post comments, observations, and questions for the participants. We're going to have a section near the end of the evening where we're going to be giving you an opportunity to put all your questions in, and I'll be pulling them out for all of our wonderful speakers to discuss and add to the conversation. Before I turn it over to this evening's moderator, though, I would like to tell you a little bit about the Society and the work that we do. Founded in 1985, the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender, or GLBT Historical Society is recognized internationally as a leader in the field of LGBTQ public history. Our mission is to collect, preserve, exhibit, and make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. Our operations are centered around two sites. We have the GLBT Historical Society Museum, located in the heart of the Castro, and that's been open since 2011. And we have our John P. DeCecco Archives and Research Center, it's Friday, in the Mid-Market District. Please check out our growing array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources online at glbthistory.org. We just published a couple of really wonderful new primary source sets, and the museum is open for you to come and check out our exhibits. Lastly, I want to thank all of our members and donors who make our work possible. If you're not already a card-carrying member of the GLBT Historical Society, I invite you to consider joining today. There are a bunch of really wonderful perks, including free admission to the museum on all of our open days for yourself and a guest, as well as a 20% discount in the store, both in the museum and online. And we have some really wonderful things that we're hoping to highlight for the holidays if you're looking for any great gift ideas for the person or people in your life who are also interested in GLBT history or LGBTQ history. And we also offer special members-only and donor-only events. You can learn more about how you can become a member and other ways that you can support the Society by going to glbthistory.org/join-give. Again, I thank everybody for being here, and I will be fading into the background for the majority of this program until we get to our Q&A section, and it's going to be led by our wonderful moderator for tonight. I would really love to introduce you to Deborah Craig. Deborah Craig is an award-winning documentary director and producer whose films use compelling personal stories to raise awareness about the challenges and strengths of underrepresented communities. Her work is played at LGBTQ, women's, and documentary film festivals in the US and internationally. Her credits include the Verde Garden, Growing a Healthy Community, Living Positive, One Sister at a Time, Positive Women's Stories, I'm Gonna Be Here, Still Around, A Virtual Classroom, and Surviving Voices, Women and AIDS. Deborah Craig met Sally Gearhart in 2014 while making her latest short, A Great Ride, a 33-minute documentary about several lesbians aging with humor and zest for life that we actually screened at the museum a couple of years ago. back when we were doing events actually in the museum. Hopefully at some point we will get back to that. And the film premiered at the Frameline Festival in 2018, and since then has screened at over 50 film festivals around the globe and won multiple audience and jury awards. And I'm really excited to bring her on here to kind of lead this conversation with our wonderful panel of speakers who Deborah will be introducing. So I'm going to bring her on up. Hi. Hello.
Haley, thank you so much for having us and for doing all the work to make this happen. I really, really appreciate it and appreciate the GLBT Historical Society. I'll try to be brief because we have an incredibly distinguished panel of guests here that I mostly want to hear from them. And thank you for your very thoughtful introduction to me. Briefly, this event is a tribute to Sally Gearhart, sort of a brilliant guiding light in our community who we lost this summer, but we're hoping to honor in a documentary film, a feature-length documentary film about her life that we've been working on for several years now. This is also a fundraiser for our film, and I am not the world's best fundraiser because I hate asking for money, but we do need, film is expensive and we do need funding. And just to let you know, every penny that you give makes a difference. We had a Kickstarter recently and raised enough funds. And one of the things that we did very recently with that funding is go to Virginia, where Sally grew up and where her half-brother still lives. And that was an incredibly rewarding trip where we learned about her upbringing in a small, rural, conservative town in Virginia. And so she really went 180 degrees from there. But we got a wonderful chance to speak with her brother, to hear about her upbringing and hear about the impact she had on his life. That your support allows us to make this film. The thing I also want to introduce our wonderful guests. We have Cherie Moraga, and I want them to introduce themselves so they can do themselves justice, hopefully. We have Cherie Moraga. I'll just introduce, I'll mention their names quickly, and then hopefully we can get them all on to just give a 1 or 2 sentence introduction of themselves. Cherie Moraga is an incredibly accomplished author and playwright. And her groundbreaking work, This Bridge Called Our Backs, is just about to have a 40th anniversary. Then Dorothy Hacker was a colleague of Sally's for many, many years, and worked in the Women's Studies program with Sally. Ruth Mahaney met Sally pretty much right when Sally came out to San Francisco, and Ruth has done work in LGBTQ history. And I just did a quick calculation before we got on, and I figured out that between the 3 of them, they've known Sally for about 150 years. So that says something. And then the last person we're very, very lucky to have on the show is our co-producer and editor on this film, Ondine Rary, and she's here because she's going to talk to us about the joys and the challenges of depicting somebody like Sally in film, somebody who is so accomplished but had so many interests. And so if everyone can get on here briefly and introduce themselves just in a sentence or 2, that would be helpful. Thank you so much, everybody. So Cherie, why don't you go first?
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Cherie Moraga. I was a co-editor of This Bridge Called My Back. I'm a writer and playwright, and right now I'm the co-director of Las Maestras Center for Chicana Indigenous Thought, Art, and Social Practice at UC Santa Barbara, where I also teach.
And Ruth, could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Ruth Mahaney, and I teach LGBT history at City College of San Francisco. I have also been on the board, I was on the board of the GLBT Historical Society for 20 years, and it's an organization I'm very committed to and love. So thank you so much for sponsoring this and being part of it.
And Dorothy, would you mind introducing yourself briefly? Thanks so much.
It's such an honor to be with this group. Dorothy Hacker, 60 years, Sally in my life. I'm a philosophy teacher, and I've taught feminist philosophy since 1972. I've had the honor to be teaching Cherise and Gloria's book for many, many years with great transformational power. It's my honor.
And Ondine, could you?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-producers, and I'm the editor on this documentary in progress about Sally. And these three women are like celebrities to me after sitting with your interviews for the last year or so. It's such a joy to be here with you this evening. I primarily edit. I also have produced, but primarily edit documentary films, and I teach documentary editing at Chapman University. And that's about it.
And I'm going to add that Ondine is following Sally's footsteps, and she's currently living off the grid.
The film's being edited on solar.
So now I think we're about ready to play our trailer. Now, some of you may have seen this trailer before, but we're going to, so apologies for that. We're going to play it again for those of you who may not have seen it. And also just to show, it's kind of an introduction to just get a sense of Sally and her power and her accomplishments. Ondine, do you want to add anything else about the trailer before we kick it off?
No, it's just, it'll give you an overview sort of the whole story so that you can enter the conversation a little more easily.
Great. So Lee, if you don't mind kicking off the trailer, that'd be great.
I'm sorry. I just caught our camera woman and she's smiling. It's fun having her behind the camera. Have you noticed that? Okay,
absolutely.
Good. Oh, she's on her knees. God, I haven't had a woman on her knees for me for a long time.
This is Sally Gearhart.
And would you like for me to hold the camera for you?
She is a force of nature.
Here come the lesbians. Here come the leaping lesbians.
There are those people apparently who question the health and the beauty and the naturalness and the strength of same-sex relationships. And all I've got to say is I wish they were here today.
She reminded me of Maya Angelou, the way she would just wrap you into her words.
The woman just exuded charisma. Everything about her was as glamorous as a radical lesbian could be,
She just had it. And we all fell in love with her.
It was such an exciting time, the 70s and this feminist burst. There was the big word patriarchy.
It was before women's studies really had started anywhere.
And here was this powerful woman, Sally, who gave women great powers in her writing and in her thinking.
She also really wanted women-only space. A lot of us did.
Women's land, right? And so I came to California with the dream of having land like that.
Are you a lesbian separatist?
Radical, lesbian, feminist, separatist, italicized.
Yeah.
In the classic case of life imitating art, Sally co-founded a women's land community at the same time that she was writing a futuristic sci-fi novel that became a cult hit called The Wonderground.
Had a friend come from the East Coast searching for Sally Gearhart of The Wonderground. Well, the book is a fantasy about women with all kinds of psychic powers living on the land and flying and teleportation, the whole works.
Sally was way ahead of her time in connecting the dots. She's a visionary.
She helped change history. I think she was seen by a lot of people as a major spokesperson
for the gay community.
Overwhelmingly, it is true that it's the heterosexual men, I might add, who are the child molesters.
I believe that's a myth. I've never seen
senators, the FBI, the National Council on Family Relations, the Santa Clara County Child Sexual Abuse Treatment Center, and on and on and on.
Sally Gerhardt, at a particular moment in our history, when it really mattered, she stepped up and she inspired tens of thousands of people, articulated the dreams of millions. She's an extraordinary woman.
By now, I found myself wondering, why haven't I ever heard about Sally Gerhardt?
Here we go, girls.
My attempt to find out
Hold on to each other's hands. We are encouraging relationships among women.
turned out to be a pretty wild ride.
Sorry about that, girls. We're gonna be okay. Deborah Craig, she was handed a puzzle, and it was up to her to untangle it.
Thank you so much. Now, if you're, I hate to admit it, but I've watched that about a million zillion times, and it still makes me laugh because Sally just makes you laugh and makes you feel that joy in life. So, and we really did think we might fall out of the back of her car, by the way, but we made it out alive. So I hope that feels like a good introduction to Sally's accomplishments, but also her exuberance, and also in some sense to the way in which, for us, the quest to encapsulate her life in film as best we can has really been a journey. So for us, this journey means finding the people that were important in Sally's life. And it's a challenge because there were so many of them. But I think through that process, we've also really been honing in on some of the people who were really there at the core and knew Sally, not just as somebody who was up in front of the crowd, but knew her more in her core as the complicated person, the fascinating, brilliant, accomplished, and complicated person that she was. So that's why I feel so grateful to have you here, Cherie and Ruth and Dorothy. So let me come back around to you again. Cherie, can you tell us a little bit about how you knew Sally and what she meant to you?
Well, I met Sally like I think probably a lot of people. I met her in the Castro Theater on the big screen in The Word Is Out, and I just knew I had to meet her after I heard her, because what is that? What year was that? 1970 what?
77?
Thank you, 77. I think it was 78, 77. By 1978, I was in her classes, and I just tracked her down. I had finished college, and this woman spoke, and it was how she embodied queerness to me. She's a masculine woman. You know, I'm a masculine woman, young dyke, you know, and it was in her body. It was in her body. It was in her how she talked, you know, and it was in her courage. And so when I found out that she was teaching at San Francisco State, I had a BA, but I moved up in the Bay Area and to be out really. And when I tried to track her down, but I had graduated in English. I had a BA. Not that any of that mattered. I just wanted to get to Sally. But I found out that her partner was Jane Gurko, who did teach in English, right? So I decided, and for a while I had been reading a lot of like self-educating around lesbian literature, like forming groups, you know, like readers groups and stuff on, you know, kind of study groups on queer stuff, because obviously graduating in 1974, there was nothing to read. And so then I said, okay, I know what I do. I'm gonna get a master's degree. So I go over to feminist studies, and there is no master's degree in feminist studies. So I knock on Jane's door. In those days, you just knock on the door and find a professor. Anyway, so I knocked on the door and I said, you know, I have this idea of doing this master's degree in feminist literature, you know, with a lesbian perspective. And I said, but I know you know, I want to do my own thing, I guess. Is that possible? And she says, well, you need to talk to Sally Gerhardt. You need to talk to both of us. And I go, right. That was exactly what I planned. It was all working out. So it was a really beautiful moment. So the two of them ended up being my advisors in designing my own program in feminist, as a graduate student in feminist studies when they did not have one. And of course, SFSU at that time, it was at San Francisco State, you know, had an incredible feminist studies, or, you know, women's studies program, largely because it was built on people like Ruth, you know, there were lectures, they were coming in, there were people who practiced feminism in the day and they taught it at night, or vice versa. It was really an activist department in a way I've never quite seen since. I mean, it was, you know, this is pre-appropriation by corporate America, you know, it was really beautiful. So they were, and what can I say? I have a lot to say about Sally, but, you know, I think if we're just talking about how I met her, that's how I met her. And we can kind of circle back around, but she was the most, you know, I took her classes, and I took a lot of, you know, really interesting classes there. One thing that I just have to say is that the arrogance of youth, you know, is important to remember, because I don't know if I would have done that at another time in my life, but I was so damn hungry. I was just, that's part of me always makes me cry, because it is still 1977 for so many queer people, you know, and God, how blessed I was to knock on a door and find these two women who really, it wasn't about the, you know, the MA, which I'll talk about later. It was about where that was going to take me. And that these two women, and particularly Sally, allowed me to go to a place that has changed the rest of my life. We can circle back to that.
That's wonderful. I think that really comes back to a theme that I've noticed, is that Sally's and Jane's impact on transforming people's lives.
Yeah.
And that's something that we really want to focus on in the film, not just her own accomplishments, but the way she really supported and encouraged. And, you know, it's like her little, you know, birds or saplings or whatever you want to call it, and then let them fly out into the world to do their own thing. And then, so that's certainly something we're going to focus on the film. Dorothy, since you've known Sally for the longest, can we go to you again? You know, how you knew Sally and what she meant to you? And I know that's a big question, but hopefully it gives you the latitude to, you know, say what you need to say.
Well, my friend Adrian Tinsley actually knew Sally from the time she was a kid, and Sally was her camp counselor. Sally came into my life in August of 1961. So it's been 60 years. I always love to say, Sally, I always like to say we never broke up. And it's really true. Sally just added, she didn't subtract. You know, so her life just became bigger and more expansive. This big woman walked across the stage at Texas Lutheran College. She was directing a play. I mean, it's just as trite as it can be, everybody, and it's also just as real. It was love at first sight. That was it. She was my woman. It took me the next 4 years to get her to take me seriously. 8 years or 7 years. I was very persistent. I was very, very dogged. The bottom line is that Sally and I came into lesbian feminism together. We had both been raised in an intensely homophobic, woman-hating, racist, classist, patriarchal world. I had been in a very difficult and very very shut down religious framework. When I met Sally, she was a Christian. She was reading Ayn Rand. Please, right? Oh, please. I talked her out of that. I'm very proud to announce this. The bottom line is, without Sally Gerhardt, I don't exist. My entire life began when I was 18 years old and I saw her. I lived the rest of my life in relationship to her. And it's been the greatest honor of my life to have worked with Sally and Jane for over a period of 10 years to really hone and craft and finally publish Sally's magnum opus called Little Blue, which I really, really hope people, as a result of this film, will begin to pay more attention to, because The Wonderground was Sally's absolute lesbian separatist fantasy, and Little Blue is her global view of what a woman-led world actually looks like.
Really interesting. And again, in the film, we're so interested in looking at all these periods of Sally's life, including Virginia, including Texas, and how those in many ways were so different from where Sally ended up, but in many ways were a launching pad. And when we were in Virginia, we were talking to Sally's half-brother, Lewis, about in some ways how Sally came full circle, and the connections between a small town like Pearisburg, Virginia, where Sally grew up, and a smallish town called Willits, where Sally ended up, where she knew everybody, where she connected with everybody, regardless of their gender, political orientation, sexual orientation. That it's just going to be so fascinating, I think, hopefully for people to see. It's a great, I think we were writing one of our grants, and Andi and I were talking about this great American story of transformation and how people's ability to really transform themselves is, I think, such a key thing that we see in Sally's life. Ruth, can we come to you? Because again, you as well have known Sally for so many years, and in some of the same capacities, but in some different capacities than Cherie and Dorothy.
Yeah, we were never lovers, so not that capacity. But she is related to my coming out, which is the first time I had the great pleasure and joy to sleep with a woman after really wanting to be a lesbian and trying to figure out how to do that. I ended up sleeping with someone in San Francisco. I came to visit, went to a march against the war in Vietnam in San Francisco, a huge march. And that night ended up at this woman's house, and her roommate's cat peed on the sleeping bag I was supposed to be in. And one thing led to another, because I had to sleep with her because my sleeping bag was not working. And so the next morning, this woman got up, walked across this enormous room that she had, and on the other side, she picked up the telephone and called somebody. I was like, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Sally, I did it." And screaming out of this phone, this crazy woman just starts whooping and hollering and screaming and congratulations and yay. And I thought, who is that? And that was Sally Gerhardt. So that was my introduction to Sally. I then moved to San Francisco, and a few months later arrived and met Sally in person. And she promptly roped me into being on a panel to speak to a conference that the Council on Religion and the Homosexual was giving in San Francisco. And they would gather ministers and other religious folk and come to they would do these weekend conferences to talk to them about homosexuality. And so she roped me into being on that panel, and then kept making me do various kinds of panels and political work. I remember once she wanted a picket line in front of the San Francisco Family Service Agency, and which had a program for counseling LGBT people. And she was on the board. And so she was inside, but she wanted some pressure on the outside. So I was often the pressure on the outside, screaming and yelling in the streets, wherever Sally wanted me to be. So I guess I went from that to starting to teach women's studies. And Sally was busy organizing women's studies at San Francisco State. I ended up at Sonoma State in women's studies, heading that program. And so we were in communication a lot around that. I eventually lost that job. The administration didn't much like me. And so I ended up at San Francisco State also. So I was with Sally around women's studies. She was more in the speech department, but was working a lot with women's studies and was part of a network that was really shaping that program. So I worked with her there. I also was on an organization called the Lesbian Caucus, which formed right after Harvey Milk was assassinated. And it was a group of lesbians who were at first trying to pressure the mayor into hiring a woman as Harvey's replacement. Anne Cronenberg was what we wanted, but that's not who we got. But we continued to meet as sort of this group of lesbians who were active all over the city in various things. And Sally and I were both in that together. And then we were just good friends. We hung out a lot. I also did speaking engagements with her. She would be invited to speak all kinds of places because she was a great speaker. And several times she had convinced them that she wanted to do a joint lecture with me. And so the two of us would go, and she would be the cultural feminist and I would be the socialist feminist. And we would proceed to argue with each other on stage. And the audience often got really, they were very not happy with us arguing, and they would try to get us to agree, or they try to resolve our disagreements, which we loved watching happen. And we had a great time doing it. We loved it. So anyway, and then we were friends. We were at parties and demonstrations together and hung out. So that's how I know Sally.
Well, I love that last anecdote because in case, hopefully I didn't say this already, when the first time I met Sally, she talked about disagreeing with somebody, and she said, disagreement is where the action is. And I've talked to so many folks, and I think one of the reasons later we're going to move on and have at least a little bit of a discussion about separatism is because that's not an easy topic. It's a complicated topic. It's a controversial topic. And so maybe that's where the action is. And also just to hear Sally, Ruth, and other folks that I've interviewed talk about, we're going to talk to Mina Caulfield tomorrow, was a Marxist who was in the Women's Studies program, that the incredible importance and power of disagreement and being able to stick up for what you believe in, but also being able to listen to other people and learn from that. And that seems like such quintessential Sally, a hallmark of the times, and something that we're losing or have lost that we need to regain. So I think that's something we're really going to be looking at. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Ruth. I want to bring, one of the reasons Ondine is here is because we have the incredible joy and incredible challenge of portraying Sally, who is a really complex person with many interests and a very multifaceted person. So when we first started doing this film, we were talking about Sally as sort of a hidden figure, which means that for many people, they're like, Sally Gearhart, she was such a beacon for them. But for people like me, I came a little bit later, and I actually had heard her name, but I didn't know enough about her. And frankly, when I first met her, I just was told, well, it's a friend of mine who lives in the woods, and she's 80 and she still cuts her firewood with a chainsaw. And I'm like, that is so cool. I want to see that. We've thought that more people want to know about her. She's not as well known as she should be, of course. But at first we were saying, well, she's kind of like Dolores Huerta, as she did all this heavy lifting and hasn't got acknowledgement for it, which is absolutely true. And there's a wonderful film about Dolores Huerta that came out recently. But then we realized, well, Dolores Huerta, as amazing and brilliant and accomplished as she is, really had one clear focus in her life. And Sally has had dozens. I mean, the more I learn about Sally, the more I realize that the breadth and the depth of this woman, which makes it fascinating and also makes it complicated for all of us, the whole team who's doing this film. So that's what I wanted Ondine to address next, is how do you take somebody that interesting but complicated and kind of try to pull all these pieces together into a coherent film, rather than a mini series, which is what we've been saying we might need to do.
And no mini series, please. So a bumblebee has shown up just as I'm about to talk here, which is part of living off the grid. So sorry about that, guys. Yeah, and so one of the things that I talk to my students about is just that constructing character in documentary is something that it's one of the greatest creative and ethical challenges in documentary film editing. And I'm sure most of you can guess or are aware that it's a very, very manipulative medium. And it's all about, of course, what you include and what you don't. And just sort of as an anecdote, I have many times used our Sally footage in my classes. And so I give my students all this, wonderful footage of Sally, don't tell them anything, and tell them to construct a character. And the different Sallys that I've gotten over the years are just, it's extraordinary. Two in particular stand out. One was set to a very popular Chinese piece of music. That was a really extraordinary one. But then I had a student who, and I swear this pertains, he turned in one clip. So this is an editing class, right? So he turned in one long clip of Sally. And I thought, gosh, darn it, is this guy trying to mess with me? And, is he just trying to not do any work? And so I called him into my office hours and I sat him down. I said, listen, are you shining me on? Or, what is this? This is 2 edits. And he said, this is how I felt was the most authentic way to represent Sally. When I watch her at length, I can see her thinking. So that really resonated with me and reminded me of how incredibly difficult it is to reconstruct a real person in this, medium that we call film. Just so that people are aware, there are just a couple principles that I go by. And one is I try to take account of the whole person and, sort of who they are as a whole. So what can we say about Sally? 3 things we could say about Sally. Anybody want to jump in? Great sense of humor, right? Great speaker, very, very intelligent. So you want to make sure not to cut all of the jokes out. So that'll be the first thing. And because it's very easy to make Sally seem like she's not funny if you cut all the funny parts out. So So in general, there wouldn't be much left, but it would have to be a very short film. But so in general, we're trying very, very hard to not only bring in all of the different aspects of Sally, which is challenging enough, but also all of the different ways that people perceive Sally and think of Sally. And in that, I tend to look for people saying the same thing over and over again. So Cherie told the story of how Sally really helped launch her career. I've heard that story now. It's just been many, 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 many times. So generally, if people are saying things more than once, more than 3 times, then it will definitely be in the film. But it's very tricky because we have people saying, things that are opposite often, and how do you deal with that? And the last thing I'll say is just that the added challenge with telling Sally's story is that she's so gosh darn, she's so imaginative and such a great storyteller herself. And of course, obviously, so interested in the patriarchy. And we are doing our best to tell this story I'm going to just use the word non-patriarchal way, but we're trying to not sort of have a biography that puts her up on a pedestal, but rather really look at the entire community that she was a part of. And also not to come to any easy answers, which kind of circles back to what Ruth was saying and a couple other people were saying about disagreement, that the film leaves a lot of room for people to think about things, that we juxtapose things that are opposites and allow people to come to their own conclusions. And the last thing I'll say, this might sound a little odd, and I don't have the direct quote here, but someone at some point said that, when you put someone in a documentary, it's like killing them, which sounds extreme. But it's because they become frozen. And so they sort of become this one thing, and then it's not possible for them to be anything else. So one of my goals with this film is to leave enough cracks in the film for Sally to slip in and out in all of her, crazy ways, and not to kill her, if that makes any sense at all. Yeah, so.
Wonderful that we're not going to kill her. We're going to bring her back to life. And Ondine, speaking of which, we have a new clip that Ondine put together that I hope shows some of that creative side of Sally, not to mention shows her in the community context. And I'm so glad Ondine said that, because it really is, feminism is about that community context. It never was one person. It always was us, not me, or not she, or not them. And, we can joke about lesbian potlucks, and we know that Sally always had to bring her own food to them, but it really is a metaphor for the collective approach to trying to change ourselves in the world. So anyway, Ondine, do you mind giving a quick introduction to this clip that we're going to show, the new clip?
Yes, and this one needs a little more introduction than most, just because it's probably the most experimental thing we've done so far, and it's also very new. So one of the hardest things to get right in a documentary is the intro. The whatever happens before the main title, and it's usually the last thing you get right. And so this is just early days of me sort of playing around with that intro, and it includes the reenactment that Lynn Weddington did with her. I think it was a class at Sonoma State that filmed the first chapter of The Wanderground. So we're playing with that in this excerpt. So I think that's all I need to say. And it's about 4 minutes long. So I think we can run it.
Okay.
Jacques stood above the eastern ensconcement, gazing across the high meadow.
Your healing powers. Armor.
Suddenly, from a completely different direction, she heard in her head the clang of armor.
Maybe it's a man. I almost forgot the wars. Someone else there, too. Diana. I'll help you, Jacques. Let's move mounds. Look with me.
Now Seja was lying on the ground on her back. Jacques was incredulous. She must be crazy, she whispered. Seja, in the face of danger and even death, was lying down as if to sleep. How long they stayed there, the armored woman and the vulnerable hill woman, Jacques could not tell. She dared not breathe lest the stranger leap forward and slash Seja's waiting throat. She held fast to Diana. Then it happened. Seja opened her eyes. At that, the standing woman looked to each of the weapons, and with intentional slowness dropped each upon the ground. It seemed to Jacques that they looked at each other for an eternity. Then the unburdening began. Piece by heavy piece, Seja took the armor from the body of the stranger.
May your dreams ease your wakefulness, said Diana. And she kissed the cheek and passed her hands over the young body and rose to descend the path. Yeah. Oh, my God. Oh, great Scott. I haven't read that in 30 years. I'm totally unfamiliar with it. What in the hell are you people doing?
A lot of women still remember you. You were seen as a leader.
I don't think I still am. I don't think anybody remembers me that well. Do you think? I don't think so. Maybe they have a happy memory of me, and that's fine, and I'm happy with that. I don't have to be a leader.
So before I move on and ask some questions of folks, I wanted to not forget to ask folks in the audience to keep in mind that we were constantly looking for photos and especially footage of Sally or related to Sally. And we found that by just putting out a call, to our email list and things like that. And it's really fascinating and interesting, footage shot at the time that I think does a lot to capture the essence of the Wanderground. So if you have any thoughts about, you might have something in your attic, or you might know somebody who has something in their attic, or you might know where to find stuff, please do let us know. I'll come to you if need be. I'm happy to. The thing now I want to ask questions, and I think in this case I want to start with Ruth, is we're really interested in Sally's creative side. So Sally, again, she had so many facets. She had her funny side, and then she had this incredible gravitas as well. And she had her very, very logical side. And some of her writing is just incredibly logical. And she also had her very creative side, which I think that the Wanderground is one expression of. The Wanderground also is it's a visionary expression connected to the idea of lesbian separatism. So Ruth, I was wondering if we could start with you and just talking about one of both of those things, Sally's creative side, her visionary side, and how that connected with lesbian separatism.
Well, let me start with a conversation that I had with her one day. We were going down, she was giving a keynote lecture at a conference in San Diego that actually one of my ex-students was putting on, and was very excited to have Sally come and be the keynote lecturer. So I went with her on the plane, and we're on an airplane, and she suddenly turns to me and says, you know, the Wonderground, it's not okay. I wish I could burn everything I've ever written every 10 years. And I said, Sally, don't do that. You know, I mean, I'm an archivist, so, you know, no. And she said, well, there's no sex in the Wonderground. How could I have not had any sex in the Wonderground? Those women don't have sex. It's like, and then she proceeded to tell me that she had been learning about S&M sex, and proceeded to talk with great enthusiasm about it and what she was learning and how she loved it. And the entire, I realized suddenly, I noticed that the entire plane was totally silent. There was like not a sound. The whole plane was tuned into this booming voice talking about S&M lesbian sex. So anyway, you know, I think her creations and her creativeness, you know, she was not all that excited about, you know, what she created and having it become this great expression of herself that she also had. She was changing also, along with all of us, that she too learned and was growing and exploring new things, and was excited about that. So, so I guess part of her creativeness for me is her sort of openness, that she would in fact let in new ideas. You know, she did believe really powerfully in women and in lesbians, and wanted to have spaces for women to be with each other. She definitely saw women loving each other and or themselves as the supreme act of resistance in a sexist patriarchal culture. So, you know, she thought that that was primary in some ways, I think, and I don't think that changed. But she did, at the same time that she was arguing for women-only space, and so powerfully for, you know, lesbian vision, lesbian land, whatever her vision was, she also was working all the time with men that she adored her, and they worked really well together. So, and I don't think she ever made them feel like they didn't belong, or, you know, it was, so somehow she managed to argue for this lesbian culture and wanted to have all her classes be all women, wanted her, you know, a lot of the spaces that she was in, but she also managed to keep connection with a lot of the men that she was doing political work with and working on boards with and teaching with, colleagues in the speech department. And then her male colleagues, you know, adored her. So I don't know if that answers your question, but somebody else.
No, it shows, to me, I think it's such a great illustration of Sally. Nothing simple, and the more you learn, the more you realize. Nothing simple, and that also that idea of ever changing. I think it was her friend Cynthia Secor that I talked to. Sally moved on. She developed new interests. You know, there's some people who are brilliant who do, I grew up as a jazz musician. There's some people who are brilliant who do the same thing for 50 years. And then there's Miles Davis or John Coltrane, where every 10 or 15 years, there's something completely new. And Sally seemed a little bit like that.
And yet it seems also like there was a core to it that sort of traverses through all of it, which is part of what's so fascinating about it. Yeah. It's hard to put into words, but yeah.
That I think that core maybe of connection and communication, connecting with people.
Yeah.
Again, we've talked to so many different people about separatism, and some of them have said, Sally, you must identify her as a separatist, a lesbian separatist. And then I've talked to somebody who said, Sally could not be separate from anybody. It was not in her DNA. Dorothy, I was wondering if you could address that issue, and it's sort of several issues in one, but both Sally's, you know, visionary and imaginative quality as expressed in the Wanderground, but also the Wanderground is as a utopian vision of a women's community, and it's almost like how did that Sally kind of try to walk the walk, not just talk the talk in terms of that, and how did that work and how did that not work?
Well, I want to reinforce the idea of Sally being on the move. Cherie, you remember, possibly you remember at the Hullabaloo all those years ago, you defended Sally because she gave a speech that was completely unexpected, totally opposite of what the group wanted, and actually a third of the women walked out. And she spoke later, and just really, you know, call everybody to accounts in terms of that rigidity of not letting someone move. I remember you said, you know, that was one of the most courageous things, you know, that you had seen someone do, was kind of to give sort of that anti-activism speech to an auditorium of people expecting some kind of firebrand.
Right.
Look, patriarchy has caused so much suffering, and those of us that are on the receiving end of the oppression, we have to find a way to envision what's possible. We have to find a way to come back to ourselves. So, for example, when Cherie and Gloria wrote This Bridge Called My Back, this is a collection by radical women of color. And they chose to spread it to cast that net as widely as they could. Many women from many different backgrounds, but they shared racialization, they shared sexualization, they shared homophobia, they shared class oppression. So the point is, we have to get to each other. We need to have spaces where we are just with the other people who have been labeled the same way we've been labeled, to begin to see differently, to think differently, to hear each other into speech, to use Neil Morton's wonderful phrase about consciousness raising groups. Separatism was absolutely necessary. I will never forget what it meant to me the first time I went to the land. I was helping put the floor joists in the bottom of Jane's cabin. I'm sure I'm using the wrong word, but I'm not a carpenter. But a crew of all women building houses. I was electrified. At one point, I thought I was going to pass out. I just couldn't. I'd never seen women do this before. So separatism was that moment, that place where we recreated ourselves, and separatism became, in a sense, a way of life. It also became an ideology, and one of the greatest criticisms of separatism is that it in some of its forms, it would see men as the enemy. And of course, MEN, there are 4 billion of them, just like WOMEN, there are 4 billion of us. And we use these words very cavalierly, thinking, that it applies to all of us. So separatism, when it becomes insular, I think can be a cessation of growth. But at the beginning, the first time you ever sit down with women like you, of your ethnicity, of your class, of your language, it's transformative.
I just wanted to jump in very quickly and say that we have found footage of those building sessions. And I don't know what was going on at the time, but they were mostly everybody built topless.
It was hot. It was hot.
That's what people keep saying. It was hot. It was hot. But it's amazing footage.
Yeah. I think that we hope to convey that sense of a transformative period, a transformative time in individual women's life, but also a transformative time, in our culture, maybe not quite transformative enough as we're seeing now, but yeah, I'm so glad you phrased it that way. Now, Cherie, you're an author, so I was wondering if you also could address your thoughts about the Wanderground and also your thoughts about separatism, especially as when it refers to race and or class. Was this working for everybody?
Well, I think I'm laughing because I never liked Wanderground. I just never liked it. I thought it was like, what? I was like, I'm not really big anyway on, sci-fi or futuristic or any of that, so I'm the worst person to ask about that, right? I read it dutifully, but I didn't like it. It's just like I say. But one thing I think that we forget sometimes about Sally is that she was a theater artist first, and I write theater, I direct theater, and it's like I never quite realized that when she was teaching, that's really what she was doing, that she was really making theater. She was performing, and she was damn good at it. And the function of storytelling is teatro, it's theater. And when I started, when the first question you asked, Deborah, I was talking about her body. She had embodied practice. Now people say that in academia, it's like embodied knowledge. And it's so, everything gets abstracted, but she really, really lived it that way. And so to me, it was a kind of almost not contradictory, but logical sort of development that she would find her way into a very performative kind of sexuality of SM. It's like, all I know is that, she said it was a good tennis game. That's what she put it to me, right? And, you sweat a lot. She said it's great, you got to anyway. But so that seemed to me, I think, and I always, I now many years later, in retrospect, and I look because I work with young people so much, and I have taught for almost 40 years, and the other day, my partner of many years picked up a book I wrote in 1983 after Bridge called Loving in the War Years. And she was reading it and she goes, Cherie, it's so scandalous. And I said, what? And she said, I read it now from this perspective, as the age that we are, and I'm 69 years old. And it's like, she said, we were so much freer then.
Yeah.
We were so much freer then. And she said, I'm reading it from my students' vision now. She said, it is scandalous. Like you said, and that was the era in which we were coming of age. So I feel like, as her students, we're seeing a model of a woman who is in her body. And he makes clear that she has desire. I mean, that is radical. Now, you don't find one faculty person any place that talks about desire. You know, I mean, just the other day I was saying, like, we don't choose who we desire, right? So I'm talking about, you know, I said, so we were talking about, you know, what they call now heteronormativity, right? You know, like that, right? So, and I'm saying, you know, the truth is, you know, it's like it's hard to be a heterosexual woman, you know, when you're a feminist, but you can't help who you desire. And all the grad students are going, all the girls are going, I mean, women are going like that, right? And I'm saying, here I'm a lesbian telling them, don't worry, it's okay. You know, you can want men, you know? And so there's a way in which Sally always carried that knowledge, you know, and I think that partly her development had to do with believing she had a right to it, just a plain right to it. So I respect that, you know, I admired that in her. Oh God, there's so much to talk about, but the thing about lesbian separatism was really hard between us, really, really hard, because she didn't experience what I experienced. And what I experienced is some of the most hateful, racist, you know, classist white women in my life, you know, and, you know, I experienced that first among the heterosexuals, you know, in the early days of the movement, right, against lesbians. But the lesbians, you know, this is supposed to be lesbian is the practice of feminism. It was some of the most brutal, and it was horrible. It was just horrible. And just one trip to Michigan Women's Festival was enough for me to think that these women were killers. I'm not exaggerating, you know, because they were hating their sons. And that is just unconscionable to me, you know. Now, I can say that to you because that is a living practice that in that effort to be separate, and if you're separating around race and class, those are mostly with their own race and their own class. So it's just what you were saying, Dorothy. It's an inner circle, right? So everything, nobody's suffering in the same way. But even working class white women were suffering in those contexts, you know, the assumptions, you know, about access and privilege. I mean, you know, so all of that is true. And I felt, and at the same time, the contradiction, it's not a contradiction, it was the complexity. And I really appreciate, Andan, what you were saying about trying to really write it, how do you do a full character, right? But the complexity of Sally was that I could go to her and Jane and say, my study at San Francisco State in women's study has absolutely radicalized me because of how racist and classist it is, right? In all the classes, they're fundamentally that, you know. Now, the great thing about Sally's teaching is that she allowed for the agitation, she allowed for the conflict, the class, you know, and we, you know, I took a class called patriarchal rhetoric, right? We were rebelling, we didn't want to read, you know, what she had in mind. She loved it all, you know, we were all standing up, everything like that. But in part, the truth of the matter is when I came to her and Jane both, and I said, I will leave. I mean, I did all my coursework, and I said, my thesis is going to be this bridge called My Back. I'm working on it. That's what it is. Because if there's any result of my studies, it was this bridge called My Back, because that's where I really, really encountered that contradiction in feminism, and that women of color needed each other. And basically, they both kind of agreed, you know, well, write a 10-page paper to, it's just so silly, write a 10-page paper to explain why you know the structure, right? And I did the structure of that book, right? I mean, Gloria and I worked very well together, but I know structure, right? So I was doing, it's like it was a circle, I knew what I was doing, and so we'll just justify it, right? So the point being is that for whoever they were real teachers, because real teachers, and I've said this many, many times about Sally and Jane, they let you change your mind. They let you grow into the next mind that you need to go to. And that is the greatest gift a teacher can give to any student, you know. And their example of that has never left me, because when I see a student sitting across from me and they're agitating me, you know, and what they taught me is to look at my own agitation, why they're challenging me, right? And so and to give pause to that, right? from their example. I mean, it's a incredible, it's a great gift. And so from Bridge, it's like there was a confidence that happened. She also, she was Persephone Press the first time, and that's what Bridge was the first time. And what they did too is they quickly dumped us. That press broke up, and they took out the lawyers. I always have to say that this was white feminism. They took the lawyers for us to get the book back. We had to get the money. I mean, so we can't forget that was a real, that was a road that many of us went through. And at the same time, and Deborah, you have the picture, right? So at the same time, many years later, so I'm 40 years old and I have a son, right? And I knew it was a little agitating for Sally. And I have this beautiful picture. There's my little baby, and she's holding Rafa, and everything you say is true, that she was present. And so she met whoever was there, like she was present, something that is hard for people to achieve. So even though she had this critical analysis, and I totally agree with you, Dorothy, every movement has always had a moment of separatism in it, so that you can do just what you said. So you have to, you can't, it's not an even playing field. So you have to get separate to realize what you got, what you have to offer the world and each other. And when you know that, you can move in, and even if you don't want to integrate, you can just move in those areas. Well, Sally walked in that. She knew that about herself. So there was no expense to her to be kind to men and still hold that politic, because that is a politic that she ascribed to, right? And and in our conversation, there was some distance, because that was there was a moment. It was hard. It was a hard moment between us. But always, I spent time on her land, and, it was a faithful relationship, that in seeing her before she passed with her Alzheimer's, it was like, my mom passed of Alzheimer's, and her desire to get it right, like to still record. Like when I was talking to her, she kept, if I'd say a line and she liked the line, she says, write it down so I don't forget, So I felt like we were already many, many years later still also being writers together on a certain level, which was really lovely. I mean, I was just blessed in my life to have her, as we all were.
What a thoughtful summary of this. It's I think, it sounds hokey, but it always come back around to love, I think, with Sally, and being present, and then and being open, and being so radical, but being so willing to embrace people who are different, I think, and to learn and grow herself. So again, 150 years of people knowing Sally, and Undine and I are coming here at the end, and we're just hoping to kind of absorb that and let people know. I think we hope that people get the message, not just that Sally was important at a certain point in time and did certain things, like whether it's the Briggs Initiative or the Women's Studies Department, that deserve recognition, but that the fundamental message that Sally had to convey about standing up, about being comfortable in your own body. She grew up, she came from this little tiny town in Virginia where everybody goes to church and everybody knows everybody. And she knew, she was in the closet, and she knew somehow fundamentally that she was okay, and that there was nothing wrong with her. There was something wrong with somebody else, with everybody else. But that core message of hers, of connecting with people, standing up for what's right, but connecting with people, we think we need that now. So if anybody, we don't have that much time left, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So if questions have come in, I'm happy to field them or send them along to our, real experts here who have known Sally for so many, many years. So Lee, if you want to put some questions in the chat, then maybe collectively we can field them. Okay, this is York. How about this, Dorothy? Can we take one? Because Dorothy, can you take this one? Considering how long the three of you have known Sally, how do you feel about the fact that's being made about Sally and her accomplishments? Why don't we go to you, Dorothy? I know Adrienne Tinsley is not here, and she's known Sally a little bit longer, but you've got a pretty good track record going. So.
Well, I think at first, people like Cynthia and Adrienne and me were very worried. You know, we're very, very concerned about how is this going to happen. And I think that Ondine and Debbie, as we came to know you, and as we watched you see this person just grow and expand and complexify, and the contradictions. You know, I live on the land on the mountain of contradictions. The fact that the two of you really saw that, and Ondine, the way that you put it at the very end, we don't want to kill her. We don't intend to kill her. That is just a brilliant, powerful way and I love that image of the cracks where Sally can slip in and out, because that's exactly what she will do.
Yes.
So I have become so grateful that it was this team that stepped up to do this, because I do, and I will say very briefly, I do believe that the themes of Sally's life could not be more relevant than they are right this minute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sally loved to quote there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
It's in, yeah. I was thinking of that too.
We have that and that in our minds for sure. Now, Ruth, how about you? And by the way, when we've had a lot of people who have had concerns, and I just say bring them on. We want to hear it, because again, we're very conscious of the fact that we got to Sally later in her life, and when she was somewhat vulnerable. And so we're really relying on people who have known her for longer, who have that life experience of her, that have that wisdom of her. And so we are very, very open to constructive criticism, feedback, and and to really listening carefully to people's concerns. Ruth, do you have thoughts about that?
About my feelings about the film, or you making it? I mean, I've been also nervous about it. I have seen films where they tried to portray Sally, or somebody acted as Sally, and I'm sorry, but they really didn't do it. And I didn't like it at all. And also, I'm very conscious of the way she was left out of the movie Milk.
Oh, yeah.
And that she was really upset about that. You know, we had long talks about whether she should try to publicly object somehow, and she finally decided not to. But she was really upset that she got her part of in the story got so eliminated, just wiped out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I've been really pleased that someone was taking on this project. I think it's huge, and I have so much admiration for you all for being willing to take it on. So I'm very appreciative, and you'll hear from us if you don't do it right, and you will, and I'm sure that you're getting lots of different feedback from lots of different people about it, because I think Sally is someone that we all feel like we know and kind of own her story in a way. And so, it's a hard crowd you're playing for here.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, there's so many different Sallys, and so we're really trying. We've been talking, and I think I've told some of you this, we've been using a kaleidoscope metaphor of that we're not just trying to show all the different sides of Sally, but all the different things that Sally meant to people, all the different perspectives on Sally, and there's so many of them. And that's what makes it fascinating, and that's what makes my partner sometimes say, "When are you going to be done with this film?" I am sure you all have gotten some of that. And Cherie, I'd love for you to chime in with any insights you have.
No, I'm very grateful, to echo Dorothy. I'm really super grateful. I just, the thing about, when the milk, when Harvey Milk, that film came out, of course, I'm going, that's, it's like, but did I do anything? I didn't do anything, and it's just so this feels really like, righteous, like a little bit of, in Spanish you say venganza, like getting back, like let's set the record straight, so excuse the expression, and it's good, it's solid, and I think what I appreciate too, and I don't, I just know this from having had being I'm interviewed by you, Deborah, but the willingness also to go to some really, really hard parts in her life. That where you have to kind of sit with it and say, well, maybe that was a mistake, and allowing that to be in the context of a much larger portrait. And that's why I think it can be incredibly useful, right? Because you're not trying to do, I've seen a lot of film, sometimes it bothers me a little bit with Audre Lorde, whom I knew, right? That it gets so reified, that, it's like, and they've done that with Gloria too. I see it. They just like, all you have to do is die and you get reified, and it's like, and there's so much better than that. There's so much more complex and nuanced, and that's where the lessons are, We don't need another icon. We need a real person who struggled and messed up, and, and we're wonderful. And again, because even with your little trailer, when you see her body coming in like that, it makes you so happy, right? And if you're happy, and then 1 minute you see, whoa, she did that, whoa, then that's where the lessons are. And for young people, why would it be valuable? Yeah, Dorothy was saying that. It's like incredibly valuable, to see those contradictions, and also that they did not invent themselves this year. There's history, behind it. So I thank you all, Undyne and Deborah. Just really good work, and being courageous, yourselves in doing it.
Thank you. Lee, are there any other questions coming in from the audience? Oh, Kim Caldwell. This is Kim is my partner. Okay. Can you announce where we can donate and the funding goal for tonight? Want to see this on the big screen. Kim is especially eager to see this on the big screen so we can go on vacation without me having my computer. So if you go, I think that the banner has been showing. Yeah, we're trying to raise $5,000 to pay for us to fly to Texas, stay in Texas, hire a crew in Texas, and then interview some folks in Texas who were there at the time, who can talk really about where Sally came from. And we've already interviewed Dorothy about that, who just spoke in a really brilliant and touching way about what it was like to be in the closet. But we have some other folks, Carla Bloomberg and Kathy Yandel, who are also going to give us a tour of the campus and speak to us. I think that I hope, among other things, that young queer people get out of this film that the women who came out were badasses, and it was incredibly challenging and difficult to come out at the time. So anyhow, if you go to CID, you can contribute. We're trying to raise $5,000 tonight to get us to Texas. That's where you can donate. It's all tax deductible, and we appreciate donations, large and small, even though we aren't, don't love necessarily asking for money, because it's not my favorite skill set. Does anybody have any last words of wisdom, or just things that they want us to all remember Sally by, or things they want to thank Sally for? I think we just have a few minutes left here. Any one of you?
I think that the thing that always comes to me, and you all have heard me say this in different contexts, but at the end of the Wonderground, it's the telling of the tales or the days of Artilladilla. And here's what our Artilla Diaz says. I think it's what Sally would say to us now. She says, what is the task? To work as if the earth, the mother, can be saved. To work as if our healing care were not too late. Yours is the task then. Mine is the passing. And although I may not come again.
I think I need to give it a reread.
It's a great last chapter.
It's a great last chapter.
Don't worry. You know, it's. I am not a sci-fi person either, and because I can never remember the names or what planet people are living on. but it's. I always go back around to you need a vision of something different to be able to get to something different, and that's what I think she was trying to give us.
And let me just say one more time that the most invisible part of Sally's work was something she worked on for almost 15 years. At the end of her life, her working title was called Little Blue. And Cherie, this book is worth, Ruth, have you seen Concho and Magister? The bottom line is this is her mature work with all the contradictions in it. It is an extraordinary piece of writing and so worth your time.
Thank you. I will do that.
I have one last thing to say, which is just that what a joy it is to be able to tell all of your stories in the context of Sally's story. It's just really, really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lee, I think we're.
Yes,
Thank you.
I've been watching. Thank you all so much. Look at this wonderful screen, just full of everyone with all of your stories, all of your expertise, and wonderful advice. And I've learned so much from all of you. I've learned so much from what I've learned about Sally. And I just wanted to reiterate what Deborah was saying is that we really are trying to hit a fundraising goal for the documentary tonight. So we're hoping to hit that $5,000, and any of the donations that all of you who have been watching live with us this evening, all of you who made donations along with your tickets for this evening are going to the documentary as well. But as we said, you can go to documentaries.org/Sally, and all of those donations are tax deductible. And, let's do what we can to get this wonderful team out to Texas and, continue adding to that kaleidoscope. I think that's a really wonderful, wonderful turn of phrase. I want to thank all of you who have spoken this evening and all of you who are joining us and watching this evening. I hope that you will join us for more programs and that you will follow this project. Before we leave for tonight, I'm gonna put up a couple of things as we say goodbye. You can find out more about more GLBT Historical Society programs on our website. We have a whole bunch of wonderful things continuing to come up, so you can check more things out at glbthistory.org/events. And I'm also going to be flashing up at the very end a link to our program surveys that we hope to get feedback on, what you want to see more of, what you liked about various programs. These are things that help us with grants and funding, and we also just really want to hear from you about what you would like to see the society do going forward in our programming. So I thank all of you this evening. I hope everyone has a lovely night and a safe Halloween weekend, and I will see you all soon. So
thank you so much, Lee, for having everything run so smoothly.
I love to be sitting in the background here, kind of watching everything go. So have a good evening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Take care. Thanks so much, everybody.